A street like this one, an ordinary afternoon. A child cycling home from school. One moment she's there, the next she's gone. And somewhere in Belgium, in a cold, damp cellar behind a wooden cupboard, a monster was waiting. What makes this story different from other true crime cases isn't just the horror of what he did, it's that the people whose job it was to stop him were given every chance to do so, and they didn't. This is the story of Marc Dutroux, the Beast of Belgium, and the systems that let him become one. Hi and welcome to Whispers of Evil. I'm Ilona, and if you're drawn to the darker side of European crime and history, you're exactly in the right place. This channel, my setup, as well as my editing skills are still a work in process, and so am I. However, feedback is welcome. Just bear with me, things will improve as the videos will keep coming. Before we begin, I want to take a moment. This video discusses abduction, SA, and the unaliving of children. It also covers CP, psychological abuse, and institutional failure that cost young lives. I'm going to handle these subjects with as much grace and respect as I possibly can. The names of the victims will be spoken with dignity that they deserve. If it's too heavy for you today, that is totally fine. Please take care of yourself and come back when you're ready. Your mental health comes first. For those staying, thank you for witnessing their stories. This is a story about Marc Dutroux. He was born on November 6, 1956 in Brussels, Belgium. He was a very average looking person. He looked like nobody in particular. He had an average build with dark brown hair, dark eyes and a mustache. The kind of man you'd pass in the supermarket and you'd forget in seconds. But appearances, as this case will show you, mean nothing. He was born on November 6 in 1956 in xual, Brussels. I apologize if I butchered the French there. The eldest of 5 children. His parents, Victor Dutroux and Janine Lawrence, were both school teachers, and the family spent a part of his childhood in Burundi in Congo, where his parents taught. In the later years, Dutroux would claim that he suffered physical abuse from his parents, though none of this was ever substantiated. What we do know is that his parents were separated in 1971 when he was 15 years old. He would go on to claim that he received corporal punishment from his father on a regular basis, but also this was the 70s, and being physical with your children was considered a more common way of teaching your children how to behave. After the separation, his life unraveled quickly. And as a teenager and in his early 20s, he drifted into petty crime, theft, mugging, drug dealing and trading stolen cars. He also, for a small period of time, worked as a male prostitute in order to survive financially. He was a minor in this regard, and despite what he goes on to do, the fact that he ends up working as a prostitute as a minor is obviously highly concerning. By his 20s, the crimes had escalated to auto theft, pimping, and drug offences. He somehow managed to buy multiple properties, of course, with more likely than not illegally earned money, but he was on welfare, so it was interesting to show to the state how he was able to do that. However, interestingly enough, none of these crimes actually produced a formal criminal record that would follow him, a detail that is relevant. Dutroux married his first wife, Françoise Dubois, when he was 19 years old. And she has largely stayed out of the public eye and has only ever given one interview to the Belgian newspaper called The Standard, in which she described the marriage as cold and distant. She said, hij keek naar onze kinderen alsof het larven waren. Als hij tv keek, moesten ze ook in een kamer apart zitten om hem niet te storen. This translates into, he looked at our children like they were larvae. If he was watching TV, they would have to go in a separate room not to disturb him. It's a weird way to talk about your children. I have a child myself, and I would never consider describing her as a larvae. They did have 2 sons together, and their marriage ended in 1983, driven by his behavior and the fact that he had already moved in another woman that he had met whilst still being married to Françoise. That woman was Michelle Martin. They met in 1981 at an ice rink in Brussels, the Van Vorstrink in Molenbeek. Michelle was 21 and he was 24, still married. She worked as a nursery school teacher and by all accounts had a relatively normal upbringing, though her father did die when she was young in a traffic accident, something that had real impact on the family. At the ice rink, Dutroux was a star. He was known as king of the rink. Charming, dominant, magnetic, in a specific way that certain dangerous men can be. Michelle was young, she was introverted, and she fell completely in love with him. She would later say, and this is a direct quote, "I feel alive with him." The Flemish media would describe their relationship as destructive and toxic. She was submissive to a degree that, looking back, becomes deeply troubling given what she would go on to do. She would later be described as not just a victim of his manipulation, but as an active participant in his crimes. And controversial hot take and opinion here, but if you're with a man or a woman that's committing heinous acts, especially against children, there's always a way to escape. There's always a way to get out. If you choose to participate, if you choose to stay with this person, you're just as guilty. And that's not to victim shame, but you can go to the police, you can run away, you can do something to that person so they can't commit further crimes. So I think, yes, I'm sure there was a level of manipulation, there was a level of perhaps fear for her own life, but she is still culpable. Before Dutroux became internationally famous, he had already been convicted of rape and abduction. Between 1985 and 1986, he abducted at least 5 girls with the help of Michelle Martin and a man named Jean van Peteghem. The Belgian press exercised extreme restraint when it came to the identity of these victims, and I will do the same. I will only use their names and the limited details that have been made public. The first victim was Catherine B. She was 18 years old. She was pulled into a van in the village of Aubé on the January 1st of 1985. Her eyes were taped shut. She was photographed and abused. She was SA'd for several hours before being dropped off where she was taken. She went to the police and her statement would become crucial to the eventual conviction. The second victim was a girl named Sylvie D, who was just 11 years old, the youngest in this first wave of attacks. It followed the same pattern. She was grabbed from the street, her eyes were taped, she was SA'd, and then she was released again. Marie V, she was 19 years old, and again it followed the same method of operation. She also made a statement to the police after her release. Axel D, who was 14 at the time, was also abducted from the streets, eyes taped shut, photographed, SA'd, and then released. She also gave a statement to the police. The pattern was consistent enough to be recognized. The van, the taped eyes, the Polaroids taken of the girls in compromising positions. During the abductions, Peteghem had revealed personal information that tied him to the crimes. Because of those loose lips, the police were able to locate him. The police searched the house and they found incriminating evidence. Personal items belonging to the victims, such as pencil cases, Polaroids of the victims. And during the investigation, Van Peteghem actually did break down and confessed, placing most of the blame on Dutroux. "Oh, sorry, he forced me to do these things. I'm a helpless person." If you know about these things and you don't speak up or stop them, you are as culpable. That's my thought on that. On April 26 of 1986, Marc Dutroux was arrested and convicted. Michel Martin and Van Peteghem, they were also arrested and convicted. Michel received 5 years in prison and Van Peteghem 6.5 years. The true sentence was supposed to be 13.5 years for the SA and abduction of multiple children. I personally don't think that's enough. I think that these kind of crimes deserve castration in terms of e-knocking and gen population until you also pass away. Many would argue that the sentence was already too short. I am one of those people. But what happened next is where the story becomes a national wound. On April 8th, 1992, just 3.5 years into the sentence, Marc Dutroux was released early. The decision was made by Justice Melchior Watelet, citing good behavior and prison overcrowding. Oh yeah, because the prisons are busy. Let's just let out a rapist, shall we? What a great idea. Serial rapist as that. Concerningly, even his own mother had written to the authorities warning them to not release him. Nobody listened. After his release in 1992, there are no documented abductions for a couple of years, but Dutroux was not idle. He began the construction of a hidden cellar beneath his house in Marcinelle, near Charleroi. He also continued stealing cars and dealing drugs. Then, on June 24th, 1995, in the summer, 2 8-year-old girls, best friends, playing outside near one of their homes in Grasse-Hollogne, Julie Lejeune and Melissa Rousseau. A black van snatched them from the streets. They were brought to Dutroux's house in Marcinelle and placed in the hidden cellar. An entrance concealed behind a heavy wooden cupboard stacked with bottles and jars. They were held there for months with nothing but a bucket for bodily functions, a mattress, and being fed, quite literally, bread and water. They were subjected to regular assay. Can you imagine what it must be like to be these poor girls stuck in a damp cellar and being assaulted like that on a regular basis? And not only was there physical assault, Dutroux would psychologically torture them as well. He would tell them that their families didn't want to pay ransom and that he had saved them from some gang. So not only are they being abused by a couple of people, 2 men and a woman that we know of, they also are made to believe that their family didn't care about them. How horrible. I cannot imagine being these poor girls and what they've been through. Then in 1995, Dutroux was arrested, but not for the girls though. He got arrested for car theft. He went to jail for 3 months. Michel Martin, his wife, had a key to the cellar, but she didn't use it. Julie and Melissa, they starved to death. Now this becomes very interesting because they were not the only victims in that house, but they were the only victims that starved to death. Their total captivity lasted for 9 months. Dutroux later buried their bodies at a property he had in Sarlat-Boussière. He also buried Bernard Weinstein, a new accomplice, alive there. Bernard Weinstein helped with the abduction of these girls. It was Weinstein and Dutroux that would snatch the girls from the streets. Bernard would also commit essay on the girls. The reason he probably buried him alive is because of fear of exposure. His last accomplice, Peteghem, obviously had loose lips and exposed him. But also Weinstein was due to inherit around 500,000 Belgian francs, which is the equivalent of 12,000 euros, which in 1995 was it's a decent amount of money. It wasn't crazy. It wouldn't have made him super rich or anything, but it was a decent amount of money. But I imagine he was most likely fearful of being exposed once again. On August 1995, he struck again. Anne Marchal, 17 years old, and Eefje Lambrechts, 19. They were 2 best friends and they were members of a touring amateur theatre group. And the group was actually on holiday in Westende on the Belgian coast. It's a very well-known, famous holiday town with nice beaches and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure we've been there as kids. I might be wrong. I think that's a bit south. We were more up north. I can't remember the name, but we've also been there for day trips because I used to live fairly close to there. Not in Belgium, but in the Netherlands. They were abducted between the night of August 22nd in the early hours and the early hours of August 23rd by Dutroux and a new accomplice called Michel Lelivre. They travelled to their holiday homes in West End after a night out in Blankenberge. Funnily enough, I actually have some familial connections to this case in a roundabout way. But basically my father used to work the door in Blankenberge and he was one of the bouncers at one of the clubs. And he was actually questioned by the police to see if they had seen or heard anything, if they had seen the girls in the club. He told me he remembers it like yesterday. When I told him I was going to do this case, he told me that. So let me find what he said. I told him, first video is going to be on Marc Dutroux. And he writes, oké, ik weet nog dat ik aan de deur stond in Blankenberge. De dag erna dat die meisjes verdwenen kwam de politie aan ons vragen of we wat gezien hadden. We waren naar optreden geweest tegenover de disco. Jaren later bleken dat de 2 meisjes te zijn die vermoord waren. Nooit vergeten. I remember when I was standing on the door in Blankenberge. The day after that the girls disappeared, the police came and asked us if we had seen them. Apparently they did some performance in a club across the road from the disco where he was working. Years later it turned out to be these 2 girls. And that they were killed. I will never forget that. So yeah, like I found that interesting because I didn't know that because he had never said that, but obviously the police were doing inquiries. Anyway, they were brought back to the same house. However, this time around they were tied up onto a bed in the bedrooms because Julie and Melissa were still occupying the cellar. They were also subjected to sexual abuse. And I find this particular part of the story interesting because it seems like Michel Martin made sure that Eefje and Anne did not starve. So why would she be in a house with victims, which by the way, why did she not release them? So she kind of tries to portray herself as like a victim to Detroit. It's like he was in jail. He was arrested. Why did you not just go to the police and tell them, hey, this is what this man has been doing in addition to dealing drugs and stealing cars? Why did she not do that? No. Instead, she let two girls, young 8-year-old girls, starve to death. But she was feeding the other ones. They were tied up into a bedroom. Because I was a bit confused around this until I did some more research. But indeed, there were four girls in this property at the same time, 2 of which starved to death. So she made the conscious decision to feed some of them and not the others, which it just doesn't make sense to me. Like, why would you do that? Like, either let them all starve, which obviously is not great, but like, to me, it's just like, it doesn't make sense to starve some and not some of the other ones. I find it very odd, and I find it even more odd that if she was such a victim, why did she not use this opportunity to actually go to the police? Do I believe that she's maybe manipulated and all of those things? Sure. I fully appreciate that domestic violence is a thing. I understand people go through mental manipulation and all of those things. And sometimes people do things they might not want to do in order to preserve their own life, right? There is no record of Dutroux being physically aggressive with her. So there's nothing to... She just says that he manipulated her. That's it. There is no... Besides the fact that she was there when he S8 other girls and abducted them, from what I understand, she has not physically been subjected to this. I get it. I get if people are in certain situations and under certain circumstances, you might commit certain crimes in order to self-preserve. Totally get that. This did not seem to be the case with her. So her man was literally put in jail. She knew he abducted these girls. She had a key to the cellar, but she didn't feed them. I just find it weird. And then she tries to pretend that she's a victim in all of this. No, you're not. You are just as bad. And you deserve the same amount of time as what he does. No, like, she was not a victim. She was just as culpable, and she deserves the same level of punishment as what he does at the end of the day. If she was able to escape twice, but she was brought back every time, and they started drugging the girls to keep them quiet. Their bodies were found in September 1996, and they were buried alive, covered in plastic. It's not sure why they were buried alive. Some think it's to reduce the forensic evidence, and others say it's because he is a diagnosed sadistic psychopath, obviously, who just gets pleasure from watching people suffer and enjoys the control that comes with that suffering. Dutroux denied involvement in their murders until evidence made denial impossible. How can you, with the track record he has, and the fact that these kids were in his house and all of these things, it doesn't matter if you physically pull the trigger, you are responsible and you are involved. If you took pictures and did other things, it doesn't matter whether you used a shovel and threw them in there, you're just as much to blame. There was another victim, a girl called Sabine Dardenne. She was 12 years old at the time. He abducted her on May 28th, 1996. While she was riding her bike to school, and she was pulled into the van. She was again pulled into a van by Dutroux and Lelivre, and she was brought to the cellar with a chain around her neck. She was held there for 80 days, essayed on a regular basis, and again fed only bread and water, which is also so sadistic, isn't it? Only bread and water. I understand that they're obviously seeing these girls as things to use. Even prisoners in most jails across the world get fed better than just bread and water. Like Julie and Melissa before her, he told her that her parents didn't want to pay the ransom. And he even got her to write letters to her family. And he never sent them. So in a way, he was creating some sort of weird Stockholm syndrome situation where he was pretending to be a good guy, but then by getting them to write letters and pretending he's saving them from gangs, but then also he's essaying them. It's obviously extremely confusing for young girls. Sabine survived, and she actually went on to write a book called I Choose to Live. And she has spoken openly and bravely about her experiences. Her survival and courage are extraordinary. The next victim is a 14-year-old girl called Letitia Delhez. She was taken on August 9th, 1996, walking home from a swimming pool in Bertrix. This time, however, there was a witness. A man named Benoit Tinan saw the van. He did notice something strange about this van. The van was filthy. Except for the number plates, they were spotless. This single observation would change everything. Letitia was held in the cellar for 6 days. She was again chained. She was again SA'd. She was again photographed. But because of the number plates, the police identified Dutroux's vehicle. He and Michel Martin were arrested. And after 2 days of interrogation, Dutroux led the police to the hidden cellar. Sabine and Letitia were found barely alive, but thankfully, they were still alive.
Op 15 augustus 96 vinden de speurders niet alleen Letitia de Lee levend terug, maar ook Sabine Dardenne, die was al sinds 28 mei vermist.
What happened to these girls is unforgivable. But this story does not end with Marc Dutroux. Because the question that tore Belgium apart, the question that brought 300,000 people into the streets of Brussels, was not just what did he do? It was how was he allowed to keep doing it? Let me walk you through what the authorities knew and what they failed to do about it. Be prepared, guys, because some of this is truly shocking and horrifying. I knew about the details of this case because I grew up in Holland and it was a very famous case, but I didn't know some of these details that we are going to discuss now. For a starter, he was already convicted of essaying and abducting multiple children. He received only 13.5 years, of which he served a measly 3.5 years. He was released early in 1992 by Justice Minister Melchior Wathelet for good behavior and prison overcrowding. His own mother wrote to the prison warning them not to release him. She wrote, "I have known for a long time and with good cause my eldest temperament. What I do not know and what all the people who know him fear is what he has in his mind for the future." Nobody listened. People feared Dutroux. They knew what a dark mind, what a dark person he was. His own mother wrote to prison to not release him. There are so many mothers that stand up too much for some of their children's terrible behavior. The fact that her own mother wants him incarcerated is insane. Good mother though. Good mother. There was again another warning from his mother. In 1995, after his release, Dutroux's mother wrote the police warning them that she had seen young girls entering his property. The police did not follow up on this. So we have a convicted child abductor and SAer who is bringing children, young girls, into his property, and his mother, who knows what a problematic man he is, tells the police like, hey, this is what he's up to, and they don't do nothing about it. The third failure is that during a search for Dutroux's home, while Julie and Melissa were alive in the cellar, police officers reported hearing children's voices coming from somewhere in the house. They asked Dutroux about the unusual piping they had spotted. He told them he was doing construction work. They accepted that explanation. And this is where it gets even worse, guys. They even found videotapes during the search, but they didn't look to see what was on them. CP was on these videotapes. CP. And they also didn't bother to research or do more investigation into hearing girls' voices coming from the cellar. So they find weird piping, videos that they never checked, and they hear children's voices, but they don't investigate it. In fact, the officer in charge of this particular case was later promoted. The fourth failure was that the police forces of Neufchâteau and Charleroi failed to share information with each other. Guys, this is Belgium. It's a small country. We're not talking America. We're not talking states like Texas and Arizona. I don't know how close they are, but whatever. It doesn't matter for reference. Holland, I think, fits something like 5 times into Texas. Belgium is around the same size of Holland. They're small countries. We're talking maybe maximum an hour's drive in between. So, tips and evidence that pointed directly to Dutroux sat in separate offices. Never cross-referenced. Never combined. We're talking different councils. Different mayors. We're not talking different states and different countries. This is lunacy. In any functioning system, obviously these dots would have been connected. The fifth failure. The fifth failure has to do with a judge called Jean-Marc Connoret, who was actually investigating the case of Dutroux. And he was collecting evidence, building a case. When the public was asked about this judge, 90% of them actually believed he was doing his job really well. He was suddenly removed from this case. Why? Because he attended a charity dinner organized to raise funds in support of the victims' families. This was ruled as a conflict of interest. So that's a problem. A judge going to a charity event of one of the victims, that's a conflict of interest, but promoting a man that didn't investigate children's voices coming from a known serial house, that's not a problem though. Okay. The man that had done the most investigative work on one of the worst cases in Belgium history was taken off the case because of the fact that he went to a charity dinner. How insane is that? So we have 2 letters from his own mother saying do not release this man, and there's children going into the home. The police investigates the home. They find weird piping. They find videotapes that they didn't check to see what was on them. And additionally, they hear children's voices. They don't investigate. Then, because for some reason the police say that is in one city compared to another, they don't speak to each other. Therefore, information isn't shared, and then the icing on the cake is that this judge basically gets taken off the case, even though he was putting together a very solid case on Dutroux. Now, we'll get into the conspiracy theories of this, but some of this may not be completely coincidental. There is indeed conspiracies around him providing material that he recorded to people in elite positions within government and other wealthy individuals within Holland and Belgium. We'll get to that.
For the fifth consecutive day, tens of thousands of Belgians took to the streets. They demand a thorough overhaul of the country's justice system. Many Belgians believe that their authorities bungled the investigation of a child pornography and kidnapping ring. Despite tip-offs from the mother and girlfriend of the alleged ringleader, Marc Dutroux, police failed to act in time to prevent 4 of 6 missing girls being killed. Then the man who cracked the case and saved 2 of the girls was suddenly taken off the investigation. This sparked rumours of a cover-up. Now the Belgian king, Albert II, has personally intervened. After meeting with the families of the victims, the king joined in calls for an investigation of the investigators.
Dans des circonstances horribles.
These horrible events
constitue une véritable
a true
tragédie
national
nationale.
tragedy.
Je le répète, une clarté
We must
totale
have a full accounting
doit être faite
of
sur
this
ce
whole
drame.
affair.
On October 1996, the outrage from the public reached its peak. 300,000 people walked silently through the streets of Brussels. This at the time was around 3% of the entire population of Belgium. So 3 million people. They all were white. They carried white balloons. They brought flowers. Some had white paint on their faces, representing innocence, representing the children. There were no slogans, no political banners, no shouting. Just silence and grief and fury. Fire trucks symbolically hosed down federal government buildings to cleanse it, the people said. This was not just a march about Marc Dutroux. This was a country demanding to know how its own institutions had failed children so catastrophically, and then failed to be held accountable for it. A divided nation, Belgium, famously fragmented along linguistic and political lines, came together in grief that day. To this day, the Witte Marsch, the White March, is considered one of the most significant moments in Belgian peacetime history. 2 ministers resigned in its wake, a parliamentary committee of inquiry was established, and genuine reforms followed. The Belgian police force was restructured, protocols around missing children and cases were overhauled, children protection procedures were reformed, interagency communication, the failures that cost lives, were addressed. It took the suffering of children and the rage of a nation to make this happen. The story is not over yet though. You would think that Marc Dutroux is safe behind bars. You are wrong. Because Belgium's humiliation was not finished yet. On April 23rd, 1998, Marc Dutroux was taken from his cell to review his case files. He was accompanied by 2 police officers. When one of the police officers stepped away on a break, I'm sure it was very important to take a break when you're taking care of one of the most prolific criminals in Belgian history. Dutroux overpowered the other one, and he stole the officer's gun. He basically just walked straight out of jail. The man at the center of Belgium's biggest scandal, already a symbol of everything broken about the justice system, had escaped. He was on the run for several hours before being apprehended by a forest ranger named Stéphane Michaud. The escape triggered immediate resignations of Justice Minister Stéphane de Klerk, Interior Minister Johan van de Lanot, and the National Police Chief. And rightfully so. How dare you let a man like that escape because one of your employees needs to go on a fucking break? Come on now. It was also the moment that finally forced the government's hand on restructuring the justice system. The lawyers who had been arguing for Dutroux's release, citing the long pre-trial detention as a breach of human rights, found that argument destroyed by his own actions. I'm going to again be a bit controversial here. I'm going to again have a hot take. If you commit certain crimes, you do not deserve human rights. You're lucky to be alive. In other countries, he would have received a death penalty, and rightfully so. I am personally of the belief that people who commit crimes on animals, and in particular on children, having a very young daughter myself, these people do not deserve human rights because you've wavered your human right by behaving like an animal. You act like an animal, and I would say you get treated as an animal, but let's be real, we treat our animals better than how he's treated children. I do not condone violence, but I do condone people like him getting what they deserve. And in my opinion, what he deserves is castration. Again, not of the chemical kind. I mean, chop, 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 off with the sausage. That kind of castration. And I believe in prison justice. People like him do not deserve to have special liberties and have safe cells. No. You see how the general prison population handles child. And then I think a life sentence, which is in certain European countries, life is actually life. In other countries, it's only 25 years. I believe his life sentence is truly life, as it should be. Then I'm okay with that. Yeah, I'm okay with that. Yeah, I think if you are starving children to death, if you are creating CP, if you are just like a torturous, horrendous, sadistic individual that gets pleasure from watching innocent people suffer, watching innocent animals suffer, you deserve to suffer too. And worse. What human rights? He didn't even give these girls proper food. Literally bread and water. Nothing else but bread and water. What human right does he deserve? He's not entitled to human rights. He waived those rights the second he decided to commit all of these crimes. Yeah, I know I get a bit heated on some of these things, and so be it. I'm sure that a lot of people won't like it, but on some things I really just don't care. I have very strong opinions on certain things, and when it comes down to the abuse of children and animals, I have extremely strong thoughts and opinions, and not really much can wave me from that stance. In 2000, he received an additional 5-year sentence for threatening the police officer during his escape. So, in total, he received actual life in prison, which is unusual in Europe. Normally, a life sentence is like 20-25 years. But in Belgium, apparently life means life. Michel Martin received 30 years, and Michel Lelivre received 25 years. I wonder, how does he find these men? And this is something to ponder as well, because again, we will go into the conspiracy later. But how do you find people that are okay with you abducting and essaying girls? Because you tell me about that and I'm going to the police. Anyway, on June 22nd, 2004, 8 years after his arrest, Marc Dutroux received the maximum sentence under Belgian law, life imprisonment.
Réponse du jury à la question numéro 1, oui. Et question numéro 243, oui.
So, the conspiracy theories, let's get into it. Many claim he was connected to some very powerful people. This could explain the early release and the lack of investigation by the police. The conspiracy is that he made CP for Dutch and Belgian elites. This has, however, never been substantiated. It has never been evidenced. But is it really that far-fetched to assume that this was the case? Especially with what's been going on in recent times with the Epstein files? I think not. I don't think it's that far-fetched to assume that he potentially was very well connected, which is why he was released early, which is why there was no investigation done, which was why letters were ignored from his mother. To make the things worse, like, look, this situation does not get worse. Luckily, there's no more victims in this regard, but there are other indirect victims because tell me how this is even possible. In 2024, prison management received a tip-off that Dutroux had a cell phone with illicit images. No phones were found, but over 200 photographs of children were found. These were not just normal pictures, these were CP photos. Why does a man that is convicted to life imprisonment, presumably in one of the in one of the highest security prisons in Belgium, why does this man have access to receive pictures, hard copies of CP? How is his cell not being searched every single fucking day to make sure there's not something there that shouldn't be there? I find it just, and again, this again makes me think that there is some connection. How is he even getting pictures? Why is this man's cell not being searched? Why is he getting these sort of liberties that he is even entitled to this sort of, he's even entitled to having visitors? He is not a human, he's an animal. He's a monster. He's a beast. Why is he getting human rights like visitors and presents? Fuck. Why are the gifts not being searched? I just do not understand how this is physically possible. Not only has he abducted 5 girls, took photos of them, went to jail, was released early. Then he goes off to do the same thing. The police failed to investigate, even though there were signs there were videos there, they just didn't bother looking at them. You have a convicted killer, you just don't bother looking at the videotapes, sure. His mother said, this man is a problem. We know he's going to commit problems. To then have him escape from jail, and then for him to continue indirectly harming children through consuming CP. How does he get this? Again, how? I just don't understand. So this is what makes me think that he is indeed receiving certain special liberties because he's probably connected one way or another. Because how? How is that even allowed in jail, in prison? I don't get it. This case is actually one of the most studied examples of systemic failure in European criminal justice history. A man who had already been convicted of raping children was released early. Warnings from his own family were ignored. Police searched his home while children were alive inside it and heard them. Not only that they were there, they heard the voices and they just left. The system didn't fail once, it failed repeatedly at every level. 11 girls paid for their lives or their childhoods. They deserve better. So yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you heard of Marc Dutroux before? Do you think the early release was the single biggest failure? Or do you think it's an accumulated weight of all of them? If you enjoyed this video, then please go ahead and subscribe. I'm going to try and upload every 2 weeks. And if you know someone who should hear this story, then please share it. If there's any stories you want me to cover, if you are from Europe, because that's going to be my angle here on the YouTubes, European cases, then leave it down below. Take care of yourselves and thank you so much for watching.